Justice Chalmeshwar, Mr. Prakash Singh, Aruna, friends in the audience, and a very big thank you to CSDS and Common Cause for this report. Friends who know me know that I would not thank unless I really believe that this is a very important work. And I'm glad that at least now we are having evidence-based understandings of what is wrong, so that we can at least try and start doing or thinking or talking, as Aruna said, about what needs to be done. I'm actually going to talk about the 2 slides in the end. I do not for a moment believe that police is some demonic force or that there are no good individuals. That would be just a silly assumption on anybody's part. And I think about what are the compulsions, what are the exigencies within which the police force is functioning, particularly on the aspect of political pressure, political interference, and the kind of subservience that the political class seeks from the police. I can't speak better than what has already been spoken by Mr. Prakash Singh and Aruna. I would like to address some of the other aspects, and the reason why I think this report is path-breaking. I engage with the criminal justice system, both as a lawyer and as somebody who engages from the human rights perspective on behalf of what has been described as vulnerable groups, which would include Dalits, it would include Adivasis, it would include Muslims, it would include other targeted minorities, it would include women, it would include workers. And what is the experience of that? One word which appears, I've not read the whole report very thoroughly, I've paid more attention to these 2 chapters, but there is a phrase that appears right in the end, it may be there in other parts of the report, called institutional bias. And it's a phrase that many of us have for very long been wanting to place at the center of issues of governance, of issues of policing. And there has been a huge resistance. Mr. Wajahat Habibullah has just left. I recall when he was the head of the Minorities Commission, at a seminar of this kind, he had asked different, in fact, it was, I think, the annual day of the Minorities Commission or something like that, where he had asked senior police officers across different states to make presentations of what is happening vis-a-vis minorities. Interestingly, most of the presentations made by the senior police officers was that there is discrimination vis-a-vis minorities. I was in the audience and I had made a request then that one of the mandate of Minorities Commission is to do research. So let us have a hypothesis that there is discrimination and consequently violence, etc., against religious minorities. So can we have a research on that? The Minorities Commission, despite receiving information of this kind, has always resisted and not conducted a research, which finally we see the beginnings of. And usually we are told, well, you know, they come from the same pool of society. Society has these biases, so the prejudice is, what do you think, where do you think these people are going to come from? I don't think these kind of cop-out answers really are acceptable. They can be done in other forums, not in a forum where people are seriously engaged with issues. Here is a person who has authority of law to inflict force on you, take away and curtail your personal liberty, investigate in a manner that can actually take away your life or liberty, and therefore you cannot go away with the excuse, oh, I come from the same pool of society. The phrase of institutional racism was actually coined by Lord Macpherson after the killing of a black man in England, when his parents showed how the investigation was completely flawed, and the Metropolitan Police was compelled to delve into their own conduct. And the phrase, Lord Macpherson, after doing research, coined the phrase institutional racism and gave a definition. And I just want to read this because I think it can be adapted and understood in our context. Of course, we can always look at it from the lens of caste, religion, gender. You have today you have transgender persons actually being facing perhaps one of the worst police violence ever. And I wonder whether we can justify that as political orders. There is a report done by PUCL Karnataka many years ago, still equally valid, where the targeted violence and abuse of transgender persons by the police is documented. That can't be justified as any political party having given the orders. So there is more to it, and we will have to reckon with that. The term institutional racism was defined as the collective failure of an organization to provide an appropriate and professional service to people because of their color, culture, or ethnic origin. It can be seen or detected in processes, attitudes, and behavior which amount to discrimination through unwitting prejudice, ignorance, thoughtlessness, and stereotyping, which disadvantage minority ethnic people. One can use this in the broad sense to examine many of the issues that have actually been highlighted in this report as to the kind of responses they have received from within the police force, both qua their own colleagues as well as people outside who has a greater propensity to commit crime, etc., etc. Interestingly, for the first time, I could be wrong, we see the phrase institutional bias, and perhaps CSTS must be aware of this, that their study has been quoted in a Delhi High Court judgment, or the police study of 2018. The Hashimpura killings, which actually took over 30 years, the killings happened in 1987 when over 40 Muslim men were killed, bodies thrown into the canal by the Provincial Armed Constabulary of UP. Hashimpura is a neighboring mohalla of Meerut, of just a few hours' drive from Delhi. Case was transferred to Delhi. The trial took forever, and we get a judgment in 2017 from the trial court, and then in acquitting all the accused, and then from the Delhi High Court in 2018 October. I'm just going to read out one paragraph because I think it speaks to the findings here. The judgment says, a disturbing aspect of the present case is the targeted killing of persons belonging to one minority community. It was submitted on behalf of the accused that the prosecution in the present case has not proved motive for the commission of the crime, and since the 42 persons allegedly abducted were total strangers, the accused had no grudge or animosity against them, and further, that no sane and prudent person, much less than members of the disciplined force like the accused, who are all PSC policemen, would commit such a gruesome crime. This is what the trial court said. And the High Court says what the above submission overlooks is the fact that all the victims belong to a minority community. This was a case of targeted killing, revealing an institutional bias within the law enforcement agents in this case. A study conducted by the Center for Study of Developing Societies and Common Cause, which resulted in a report titled Status of Policing in India 2018, Study of Performance and Perception, noted that Muslims comprise only 2.5% of the police force. 64% of Indian Muslims who were interviewed were either highly or somewhat fearful of the police. The reasons for this fear were stated to be the failure of the police to act as a neutral law enforcement agency. The report notes as under, in addition to the physical police brutality, institutional discrimination is another component of policing that cannot be denied, and it goes on. So what we are noticing here is how actually valuable this research is, even for the judiciary to comprehend, because what comes before the judiciary in a criminal case, and then if you're looking only at the forensic evidence and not comprehending the context within which this is taking place, academic research of this kind actually locates it precisely in the context of institutional bias within the law enforcement agencies. There have been similar Delhi High Court judgment vis-a-vis caste, particularly with reference to the Mirchpur massacre, which again was a trial that had to be transferred. And I think that in itself seeks volumes of what was described once by K.G. Kannabiran when cases were being transferred by the Supreme Court. And he said the rule of law seems to be running for refuge from one state to the other. In the Mishpur case, again, the fact that the homes of the Balmikis were being targeted by the mob, there it was not the police, but how did the police investigate became the question. So these issues of bias, I think, go to the heart of what Indian democracy is. And therefore, the sooner we reckon with it and acknowledge it, can we start changing the ways we are going to function. And therefore, I actually, and my friends from CHR, I know this well, I have a huge hesitation in using the phrase police reform. And at least for our work, I would like to use the phrase police accountability. Issues of where the police is using its force for torture, for implicating you in false criminal cases, incarceration. I'm not sure what we are reforming over here. There have been a lot of discussions around police reform, for instance, but what I find very surprising always is that when you have, for instance, a case where torture has been shown clearly, when you have a case where there is what we call encounters, actually they are extrajudicial killings, there are fake encounters, and these are things that I've said to Mr. Ramachandran very often. We find that senior police officers who are respected or organize associations of that kind actually prefer to remain silent. And I think that adds to the problem. If the senior police officers are not going to stand up and say, we do not condone, we do not accept this being done in the name of policing. For instance, disposing of criminals or anybody else, because who is a criminal we don't know. We only read in the paper that so-and-so was called a terrorist and then gotten rid of. We don't know why, when, what. We do know that there are many very serious fake encounter cases which are not proceeding. There are political pressures. There are police officers paying a price. Many of them have resigned. Others are being implicated in a whole slew of cases. At least to my knowledge, they are not receiving support from the police fraternity. So even the one who wants to work is not receiving support from those who say we would like the system to change and we would like the shackles of the political hold to break, which I think must be broken. But it cannot be broken simply because the political class is a problem. It will have to be broken to create different levels of accountability. For instance, my surprise at the judgment, sir, in your name, the Prakash Singh judgment is, it doesn't even speak of torture. Torture is, as has been said by others, India's best kept public secret, or worst public secret. It mentions it in one place. While laying down a slew of what should be done for transfer, etc., and security of tenure, how can we not touch on what touches upon the lives of many, many people? People in Delhi would recall the case of which PUTR took to court, how in a police station in Narayana, people belonging to the SC community were asked to clean and perform all kinds of jobs at the police station and were stripped. The orders for that did not come from any political leader. That is part of police culture, which we will have to talk about and we will have to interrogate. I want to refer to another case which went right up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court acquitted those people of in a terror case, the Akshardham case, where men who were on death row, Muslim men who were on death row, were acquitted by the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court details how the torture was committed, which police officer committed the torture, names the police officers in the judgment, and acquits these men. Those Muslim men, having lost almost a decade, if not more, I can't recall, of their lives in incarceration, including some part on the death row, went back to the Supreme Court and asked for compensation for the years that they had been damaged and lost. The petition was dismissed. We do not have a law in this country for malicious prosecution. If the police prosecute somebody maliciously, not that you didn't have enough evidence or you actually had a genuinely didn't know. Malicious prosecution is a high threshold. Recently, last year, there was a report put out by the Law Commission of India recommending malicious prosecution. We still don't have a system where those who would deliberately, intentionally, falsely implicate someone in a criminal case where you can be on the death row. And if you are fortunate, if you're out then, nobody is made to answer. They had simply asked for compensation. They didn't even ask for those cops to be held to account, although the Supreme Court itself acknowledged that. Therefore, I think what we see here in terms of the prejudice and the bias, which is coming from a survey, it's not somebody sitting and saying, I think this is happening. How will we incorporate that into the rule of law? Will the rule of law acknowledge this bias? Or is there actually some other nexus at play between the police and the political class, and it's not just one of giving orders and the other one complying with them? Maybe the situation is actually much more complex, and that's what the study shows us. And if that is the case, how will we integrate accountability for this kind of prejudice and bias is a concern that I would have, and I think it's something that we need to highlight. When it comes to one of the part that I found a little sketchy in the report is that it seems to think that training is the answer to these things. I've actually done a lot of police trainings in Hyderabad, in Haryana Police Academy, in Delhi. Now I refuse to do them because I don't think they shouldn't be done. I think they should be done. I am exasperated with what happens. Unless you have a good, and we have had some very, very good directors of police academies across states, you're usually told, just tell them the criminal law quickly, forget the constitution. So that's your first problem. Because the criminal law cannot be understood unless you know its roots in the constitution. Because you are actually telling him, just go and do your job, and this is what your job is. Training is not the only answer. I've seen very closely, I've actually studied syllabus of police academies when I was heading an organization, MARG, for a couple of years. We actually compiled the syllabus that was being taught in terms of human rights and what actually was and how hollow those trainings were. I think what we're looking here to interrogate is actually something much, much deeper, and as a society, of course, and within the police force. And trainings may not necessarily be the answer. They would probably have to be coupled with many more things. For instance, if we were to take the example of torture again, torture is not something that just the police is averse to. I remember being with Mr. Shankar Sen and Mr. V.N. Rai, Vikash Narayan Rai, who was at that time the director of the Haryana Police Academy. These were new recruits into Punjab and Haryana lower judiciary. They were during their training period. We were holding a session on torture. And there's no cynicism. These people are just joining the judicial service. Except for two. All of them said, because the person who's been tortured by the police is first brought before a metropolitan or a judicial magistrate first class, and that's your first point of contact of seeking redress from any form of torture. And they all said that we will look away if we see torture because torture is required both for investigation as well as for purposes of maintaining national security concerns and anti-militancy, etc. in that kind of a, and this, therefore I'm saying this is part of the larger thinking that we have within the criminal justice system, and we need to therefore raise these questions at different levels. I will end with just saying the criminal justice system is collapsing, has been said by at least 2 former Chief Justices of India. The answers may be difficult, but they perhaps lie elsewhere. And therefore, unless we make improvement of their working conditions, which is an absolute must and there can be no disagreement, insulation from the political class, and police accountability as one seamless thing, and we don't seek one of them, I don't think we're going to see the change that we all are concerned about. Thank you.